Hi, my name's Dave Brons. I write instrumental guitar music with a Celtic symphonic twist. For my new album, I decided rather than spend £3,000 on a hot-rodded Marshall Plexi, I'd make my own. These videos are a diary of that process. We're getting towards the end of the build now, and today is a really big stage in the whole amp building thing. Today's the day where we attach the board to all the wires that are along the valve sockets here. If you look at the board, there's lots of wires connecting underneath, and the way you do this is just put the wire into the turret and solder it. So one thing I have done is I've absolutely triple checked that all the components are right and the connections are right, because once the board is down, it'd be a really long job to, and I've made a mistake, say if I made a mistake on the way it's connected on the bottom of the board, it'd be a really time consuming to unsolder everything to fix or rectify any mistake that I've made. So I've got the layout, I've checked every component on the layout, and then I've checked every component on the schematic as well. 3 times I've been over it, so hopefully that'll be enough to weed out any errors. So here we go. All I'm going to be doing is connecting up the valve sockets and checking it as I go along. So heads down, see you at the end. So as you go along the bottom of the board, it's really important that you get a really good solder connection. It should look really bright and silvery and not sort of grey. And it's important to really take your time on these connections, because once the board is down, it's really hard to troubleshoot any bad connections that you might have made. Right, so all the valves are now wired into the board. I'm just going to connect up part of the power supply, and then once the power supply is done, I'm going to head up to hang out with Daniel Holmes at Damplifier, just so that he can help me sort out some of the things I'm not very knowledgeable on, which is the bias circuit, which I've never really done before, and some of the aspects of connecting up this power supply, which is a lot more complex to any amp I've built before. So there are 2 types of bias commonly used on valve guitar amplifiers. There's cathode bias, which is for smaller wattage amps, usually up to about 20 watts, and then there is fixed bias for higher voltage, for higher wattage amps like this one. So fixed bias means that you can set how hot or cold the idling rate is for the valve, so what the voltage is on the tube when it's just resting. So it's really important to set this correctly, otherwise your amp could be either too quiet, or if you run the bias too hot, you'll burn out. So in the middle of the picture you can see 2 tiny blue capacitors, and just to the side of them there is a tiny little variable resistor which you can adjust with a tiny screwdriver, and this sets the bias. So if you're not sure how to do it, it's always better to go to an amp tech who won't charge you much for setting the bias for the amp correctly. Otherwise you can go online, and there's all sorts of bias calculators that are just a Google search away. Okay, so that is, the entire board is now connected on this side. The next job will be to wire up all the tone controls. Okay, so yesterday I went up to Dan's at Damplifier to just test out the power supply, and unfortunately I blew it up. So the power supply is pretty much the most expensive component on an amplifier, but fortunately Dan had another one, so I fitted that. So today what I'm going to do is just finish up wiring all the tone controls and complete the wiring of the board, so that I can now test the new power supply and just test the amp is safe to use. I always find wiring the tone controls really tricky on amplifiers. I don't know why. I just find the schematics confusing to read, even though I've built loads and loads of amps. So it's really important to take your time when wiring these switches and tone controls up. Again, just because quite often the mistakes I've made of being in this area and then troubleshooting them later can be super frustrating. Okay, the amp now is pretty much fully wired. The one thing that I haven't wired up are the relay switches, i.e. the things that the relays are like magnetic mechanical switches that change the channels. And I haven't put the effects loop in either. I'm going to get the amp working first and then I'll work on the effects loop and the channel switching, just because I've never really done an amp with relay switches or effects loop before, so I'd rather try it without it before. Right, so okay, that's the end of wiring. I'm very ill, so I don't know if my inner excitement is coming across, but yeah, I'm excited. Hi guys, I'm pleased to tell you that I recovered from my cold, and the next video is where we finally get to put the amp together and do all the testing to make sure it's safe, getting ready to give it its first blast. So the build is almost complete. Tune in for the next video, guys. Please subscribe to the channel, and as always, please head out to davebrons.com, listen to some of my music or have a listen on Bandcamp. I'd be really grateful. Thank you so much. See you in the next one.